Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Shashank, and thank you for tuning in to Tackling the World for today's topic of how India is handling the coronavirus. Today we are joined by Samskrit Sriram, a senior in high school, and he will be sharing his perspective on how he thinks India is handling the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's my pleasure to welcome my good friend Samskrit. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well myself. Thank you for coming on and sharing your perspective.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
Awesome. So let's just go straight in and dive into the questions here. So the first question is, what is your position and how well India is handling the pandemic?
I think overall India is doing a pretty good job. They're doing pretty well in handling the virus.
Uh
People
huh.
are obeying the lockdown order that the government mandated.
Mm-hmm.
They're following social distancing norms. They're showing support for the government and medical personnel. And if you look at how successful the lockdown is going, the ratio of the number of cases to population in India is very low compared to other more developed nations like the United States.
Uh huh.
Mhm.
But couldn't the ratios be a problem because India is not known to be testing a lot of its citizens? So couldn't that be a flaw in the ratio?
Yeah, that's definitely something that is being addressed.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, as far as stepping up testing, that's one thing that the government can definitely work on. Something that they're actually working on at the moment. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they so far they said that within the next 3 days they'll have 20,000 tests per day, and
Mm-hmm.
then by the end of the week they would slowly, gradually increase it, and at its peak it would be around 100,000 tests a day. So
Okay.
this would allow for more accurate data, but
Mm-hmm.
with the data that we have currently, India
Mm-hmm.
is doing a pretty good job in flattening the curve or handling the virus.
And this definitely has to do with China, sending, like defective kits to help with the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, many countries have asked for refunds from China, have been returning their products. So I don't think it's a surprise that, many countries like maybe India are behind in their testing.
Yeah, that's definitely something that they're trying to address, given the geopolitical situation in the area,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing the best job that they can. Um, they India has quite successfully been able to have healthy relationships with China, and through those healthy relationships, been able to get quite a lot of equipment and assistance from China as much as they can. Um,
Uh-huh.
and they're addressing the issue with the defective equipment as we speak.
Yeah. And, we're going to later on talk more about some of the relations with China and what I may be thinking about some of those things, and we can get those answered. But let's go on to something different. So, as we know, ever since the lockdown, we have heard many reports of police using violence to enforce the lockdown. Do you think it's fair that the police are using violence to disperse crowds and to keep them at home?
Um, so personally, I don't think it's fair at all. But I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important to understand that India has a very different culture with the police,
Mm-hmm.
and their constitution is much different than the United States. Um, the police are, in fact, allowed to discipline people if the law isn't
Uh-huh.
followed. But I definitely
Mm-hmm.
think that what the police are doing now in order to enforce the lockdown is not correct. But at the same
Okay.
time, I think it's important to remember that uh, what the police are doing, like what all the good things that the police are doing, help and protecting citizens at this time, working despite the lockdown because they're they're first responders, so they can't stay at home. All the good that they're doing shouldn't be overshadowed by a few bad apples.
Yeah. And I'm told this all the time by my parents and other people. Like you said, the culture and the way things work in India is so different that sometimes when a politician tells the people that he or she governs, that, oh, you need to stay in for your safety, sometimes people just don't listen. They take it lightly. And that's something that's always happening in India. A lot of people take it lightly, and police and government officials are are resulted in having to use these extreme uses of force in order to stop the citizens from hurting themselves, basically. And many Indians actually support it. If you think about it, many people actually are like, yeah, the police should be beating them up because they're being stupid, they're not following the law, they're hurting themselves, not only themselves, but they're hurting other people in their family and their neighborhood. So I definitely understand that there's a whole different perspective when it comes to how things are governed in a different country.
Yeah, and also with the police, what I think there's like a line between unnecessary force and for like the wrong reason. Like, so I think some of the cases that you were referring to, where the police are beating up people who are simply going out to get groceries,
Mm-hmm.
that of course is wrong, and they shouldn't be doing that. But then there
Yes.
are people who are going out on purpose for not, it's not anything necessary that they're doing. They're just going out and partying or something, and they're
Mm-hmm.
going out without masks and things like that. When it comes
Mm-hmm.
to that, I feel like the police do have to take a more direct approach. But I think violence shouldn't be the first thing that they're going for, the first approach that they're going for.
Yeah, and I would totally agree. Violence should not be the first thing, but given the situations in India and the environment that people live in, it's kind of required most of the time. If you think about it,
Yeah.
just speaking or just telling somebody to do something doesn't usually work. They
Hmm.
have to be feared into it in order for them to protect themselves, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So moving into the sudden shutdown, some would say that this sudden shutdown, just out of the blue, of the whole country affected many people who were traveling, as they had no way to get back home. Many people travel for work. Some people travel many states across to go to work, and trains and buses were filled the next morning that the lockdown was in place. Do you think that the Modi government could have done something better, like given a week's advance to tell the people that we're going to be doing a shutdown soon? We suggest that you go back to your houses or your towns or your cities, and give them a chance to go back to their respective states, or at least invest, or at least the government could invest in some more buses and workers to help ease the strain on the current situation. What do you think about that?
So I agree that he definitely could have given an advance notice, but given the circumstances, I think it would have done a lot more harm if the lockdown wasn't in place immediately. So according to the New
Uh-huh.
York Times, at the time the lockdown was placed, there was around 500 cases of coronavirus in the country, and it was
Mm-hmm.
doubling at a rate. It was doubling at a rate of every 3 days. It would double essentially. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so given that that level of like increase of cases, that it was increasing that quickly, I think
Mm-hmm.
it was actually more beneficial. And yes, it definitely affected a lot of people, and it was definitely an inconvenience to many people. But
Mm-hmm.
given that rate of spread, I think it was better that the lockdown was in place immediately. So one more thing that so like so one metric, for example, with the coronavirus that they use to figure out how like figure out the infectability of each person is this thing called
Uh-huh.
an R0 metric. So the Institute of Mathematical Sciences in Chennai, they have figured out this thing called the R0 metric, where they
Uh-huh.
can figure out the capability of each coronavirus patient to infect another or other uninfected people. So
Mm-hmm.
now it's at 1.55, but at the time right before the lockdown, it was at a metric of 4, which means every person would infect 4 more people.
Uh-huh.
And because of the lockdown, it's actually dropped down to 1.55 people. So given this
Mm-hmm.
sharp drop in infectability, I would say the lockdown has been effective. And despite how quickly it was instated and how much of an inconvenience it was to all the people that had to get back
And
home. Yeah.
yeah, and like let's just dive into Western media, because as we know, Western media isn't always the best place to get your international news, as they don't always speak about what's truly going on. They only have an outsider's perspective on basically everything international. Um, how do you think that this has, affected, what's happening here? Because the lockdown, I believe it wasn't much. I mean, in many other countries, there was no warning like, oh, we're gonna lock down the country in a couple days or in a week. It was all just speculation in the media that, oh, we're probably gonna be in a lockdown. but as soon as a different country does it, Western media comes in and they start talking trash about it, or like they start speaking negative things about what's happening there when they don't really know what's truly happening in the country. What do you think about the Western media's influence and what's happening in the world?
Yeah, so I agree. So I think for the most part, Western media, when they report on outside conflicts, they get
Mm-hmm.
the numbers right. But when it comes to like the things that are on the ground, like interreligious conflicts, communal things that happen, like the individual stories of people that are there, they tend to twist the stories or leave out crucial facts that would help their
Mm-hmm.
readers fully understand the situation. um like you said with the lockdown in India, how um almost immediately there were stories coming out about how people were affected due to the immediate lockdown, but in many Western countries they did effectively the same thing, but there weren't any stories, or if there were, they weren't held as, or they weren't spread as much. Like not many people knew about the hardships of those people in the Western countries who may have been
Mm-hmm.
like migrant workers who had to get back home but couldn't due to the immediate lockdown in their countries.
Yeah, for sure. And I've heard many personal stories from friends and other people and family that there's people who just can't go back to their home state because they're stuck in the state that they travel to, and there's no way that they're going to be able to go back because of coronavirus concerns and the concern for their own safety. Going on a plane or going on a bus or a train, if they didn't go by car, like there are so many different things that are going on. It's so difficult for them to come back, but you don't see them talking about that here. So that's something definitely that people should start to notice, is that Western media doesn't always give you the truth, or doesn't always give you what exactly is going on. It's always best to look at news outlets there in the country that they're talking about to see what actually is happening.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And now we're just gonna quickly go to some of research and development, so some R&D. So do you think India should be investing more into R&D for a vaccine, or should they just focus on handling the virus in their country, and allow more of the developed countries to handle what's happening? Because as President Trump has been saying, I'm gonna butcher this name, but India has started to send the hydroxychloroquine. Did I say that correctly? I don't know if you know how
Yeah,
to say it.
hydroxychloroquine,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. It's some drug that's treated for malaria, basically, in India, and India has a huge problem with malaria, so they are one of the biggest producers of it. And President Trump started saying that this is a potential cure, or this will help slow down the virus. And do you think India is doing its part by sending these, or do you think India is just giving some fake hope for countries by allowing these to be sent all around the world?
So I think so that question is kind of twofold.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of R&D for like a vaccine. So I know a lot of companies in India like Motors, Birla, and a lot of these big companies in
Uh-huh.
India, they've donated large sums of money to the government to help with relief. And I think
Mm-hmm.
similarly, the government should reciprocate in some way, and sort of encourage the private sector, like big pharmaceutical companies and research labs in India, and encourage them to invest and create a vaccine. And the central government should just focus um, on containing the virus. And then
Uh-huh.
in terms of like the anti-malarial drug, um, I think India was just doing its job as a member of the world stage, trying to help flatten the curve on the virus by simply providing the medication that these countries have requested. And then it
Uh-huh.
comes down to um, like actual the science and development of the people in those countries to figure out how effective the drug is. So, for example, I found one source that said treating COVID-19 patients with hydroxychloroquine, generally thought to have less severe side effects and has become standard at many hospitals. The drug is
Mm-hmm.
combined with antibiotic azithromycin, which some studies also suggest has antiviral effects. And even the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has authorized emergency use of hydroxychloroquine in COVID-19 patients, even though there's
Mm-hmm.
not been like a large randomized trial that has proved that the drugs, even in combination with azithromycin, are actually effective against the disease. And
Uh-huh.
then there was even another study that I read that said that Dr. Michael Ackerman, he's a genetic cardiologist at the Mayo Clinic,
Mm-hmm.
He created an algorithm that kind of that can predict the risk that a patient has um,
Uh-huh.
when treated with uh, this specific malarial drug, depending on
Mm-hmm.
how what kind of heart problems they have. So it said that hydroxychloroquine is likely to be safe for 90% of the population, but it could pose a serious and potentially lethal risk to a small number of those susceptible to heart conditions, especially those
Okay.
with other chronic medical problems already on multiple medications. But like all
Mm-hmm.
of this isn't like, I wouldn't say it is India's responsibility for that, because I think India is
Mm-hmm.
just doing its job as a member of the world stage. People are requesting medicine that
Yeah.
could help flatten the curve and yeah contain the virus. And India's doing its job by providing the virus, or providing the medication to the countries that have requested it.
So you think this anti-malarial drug has some sort of effect in helping patients with the virus, right?
It could. That's the thing is,
It could.
it's yeah. There's no scientific evidence saying that it's like 100% effective by any means. There has
Mm-hmm.
been like um here and there cases that's saying that it worked, but like the American Association for Advancement of Science said that there has been no large randomized trial that has proven these drugs alone or in combination with azithromycin are effective against against the disease. Sorry, not against COVID-19. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's kind of dangerous to just go in with this drug, because there are many side effects to any type of drug that you take, and for some people there are some serious concerns with it. And I don't think that giving people these drugs in hopes that it will help with COVID-19. I don't think they should be doing that. I mean, if President Trump really thinks that this could help with at least reducing the pain with COVID-19, I think he should just start running a trial, and try to see if this works with randomized tests, as you said. So why don't you think President Trump has started to do that, or why hasn't India started to do that? Because if those actually help with COVID-19, India could start using those for a lot of its patients, because they're the biggest producer of it.
Yeah. So I think given the situation, I mean, in the U.S., I don't want to like uh, I don't know, bash the president, but like given the situation
Mm-hmm.
and how he's handled it so far, he's obviously doesn't know what's going on. Like even with recently, I think many of the listeners will know where he told people to like inject themselves with bleach and that'll help cure the virus. Like
Yeah.
when he talked about the anti-malarial drug, I don't think he was being serious in any means, and he was just talking something that he heard from someone in the health department that he heard from them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and even if he wanted to do clinical trials, it isn't up to him; it's up to the U.S. The Food and Drug Administration.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, I think the Food and Drug Administration is just swamped, um, trying to figure out like how to, because they have like food restrictions that they have to put up, especially during coronavirus, because they're also in Food and Drug Administration is also in charge of like the restaurants and all those things. Like they're kind of part of the health department. The health department is
Uh-huh.
swamped at this point. That I don't know if they can actually have an effective trial to.
But isn't the Food and Drug Administration under the federal government, which by all means the president controls?
Yeah, but the with the separation of powers and things and stuff, I'm not sure how much control the president has, like direct control he has over like the Food and Drug Administration or the Human Health Services, like that department of the government. I'm sure
Uh-huh.
he can do it, but like I said, I don't think he was being serious by any means. I think he just heard it from somewhere and then like under pressure, you just told it to the press, and then you know how the media spins things and it just becomes a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
So
I
um
mean, I mean, I think this goes on to a whole other issue,
mhm,
not relevant to really this topic of India, but it just shows that as president of the U.S., he really needs to be more careful with what he does talk about, because not everything is taken as a joke or oh this or that. Because sometimes when the president of the United States says something like a drug may work, it's taken seriously, because in a dire time like this, they trust the leadership at hand, and they trust that they're doing the right thing or giving them the right information. So that's a whole other topic. But that's just my little view on
Yeah. Yeah.
how they could how he needs to be more careful, and everybody knows about that.
Yeah, and again with the hydroxychloroquine thing, there was a case of someone who ate like fish tank cleaner because he thought he saw hydroxychloroquine in there, but it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
hydroxychloroquine. It was like It was like a variation of hydroxychloroquine that's like much more deadly. Like it was like it had like one molecule difference, which makes like a lot of difference if you know like
Yeah,
H2O, but like H3O is like deadlier, that kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of crazy dangerous.
Yeah.
And going into research and development, but like finding a way for India to get rid of the coronavirus. According to some researchers at Princeton University, India could have a way of getting rid of the coronavirus by building immunity. They state that India has the biggest population of young people, making them less vulnerable to the virus, according to some data, than older people. So they suggest that India should consider herd immunity, where the Indian government can release the virus in a controlled manner for the next 7 months. And by the end of it, you're giving 60% of the country's population immunity by November. And, this could possibly be a really great way for India to solely control, because, as you know, with the lack of infrastructure in India, it's not as easy as it is in America to treat patients or find them at least. So maybe herd immunity could be something that's potentially possible in India. What do you think about that?
I think herd immunity is definitely a possibility, and I think Sweden is working on it right now, and they have almost achieved complete herd immunity. Um,
Uh huh.
but I think what needs to be taken into account are the symptoms of the virus and how quickly it can mutate, as well
Uh
as
huh.
like the kind of culture that exists in India. So, like, if a mutation occurs while the herd immunity experiment is taking place, it'll risk exposing everyone who's under 60 to that new mutated virus. And then
Yeah.
also in India, unlike like unlike Western countries, the older generation tends to stay in the home with the family, so you'll have like multiple generations in one home, in like one
Mm-hmm.
place. Um, Unlike Western nations where the grandparents have like a separate home, or they stay at old age homes. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
that can be easily isolated. So in India, if you try this herd immunity thing where you let those under 60 out, and then they come back home, they may come into contact with the older people at within their house who may not have a strong immune system, and then that would cause further
Yeah.
problems. I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
possibility, but there needs to be a plan that kind of addresses the situation that I was talking about with the multiple
Yeah,
generations.
because
Yeah.
there's a lot of problems with it. One of them you outlined, but the other one is that you know young people are shown to handle COVID-19 better, but that does not mean that every person that's young is going to survive it. Definitely, people who are overweight or have diabetes problems, and there's a lot of people who are overweight or obese in India, and that could really affect the outcome of COVID-19. And there's so many issues with herd immunity, and I get what researchers are saying, and I do agree with you. There needs to be some more. There needs to be a good action plan set in place by the government for this to actually work out. And
Hmm.
as you said, with grandparents or parents living in the same house as their children or grandchildren, it does become a problem as they do come back home with the virus. So yeah,
Hmm.
there's definitely a lot going on.
I
And
think, yeah,
mhm.
go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's fine, go ahead.
So I think one thing that they could possibly do in India is I think they're trying it out, or they're gonna propose trying it out in the U.S. is picking out like 2,000 volunteers and like people who are volunteering to be exposed to the virus, and then these people who are and then you can like uh, have the people in charge of the herd immunity experiment like pick out uh, the most optimal candidates, like the most healthy people.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's a possibility, but it's still there's still that risk involved of like what happens like if they get sick, or like something goes wrong, um, and I don't know. There, like we mentioned earlier, there needs to be a more concise plan that can be looked at, and analyzed and addressed, um, before just jumping into it.
Yeah, and there's like the whole big moral factor too about just letting the virus, go out and spread. So,
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot that's going on. So, with India's economy, as many people may know, India's economy even before the pandemic was not doing the best. It was very lackluster. It was still growth, but not as much as people would hope or India would need for it to become a great superpower. And what kind of effect do you think this has on the citizens? Because the economy was already falling before with with a lot of people without jobs, and with the pandemic now, there's so many people without money, without food, and without a job. They have no way of keeping their family safe or sustaining their families. So, what do you think India's economy, like, what kind of effects do you think it will have on their citizens?
I think if it goes unaddressed, it would certainly cause the economy to tank. People will lose their jobs. But I think currently the government is doing a pretty good job in balancing protecting citizens, but also making sure the economy doesn't tank.
Uh-huh.
They've announced a lot of stimulus packages. They began heavily subsidizing food and grains for those who are in need. There's a lot of cash transfer measures that I've read about, and
Hmm.
essentially they're trying their best to make sure that people who are most in need are getting the help that they need,
Yeah.
without without causing the economy to falter, but also making sure that you're not risking the lives of Indian citizens.
Yeah, and before we go on, I'm just going to talk about the stimulus package and explain to the listeners,
Mm-hmm.
what actually is involved with it. So, India recently announced a $22.5 billion stimulus package, which would mostly be helping poor households through food security measures and through direct cash transfers. According to CNBC, the food security measures will affect 800 million people, according to Sitaraman, who is, I believe, secretary of. She's like the treasurer, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah. Do you know exactly what her title is?
I think Treasury Secretary. I'm gonna.
Yeah, Treasury Secretary. Yeah, and under an existing scheme, low income earners get 5 kilograms of rice or wheat per month at a heavily subsidized rate. But now, in addition to that, the government is giving an additional 5 kg of either rice or wheat per person for the next 3 months, and 1 kg of pulses per household for that same period. And this is all for free without poor people having to pay a single thing. And the government has been doing this long before the pandemic. It's been a constant program, but now they're upping it with this new stimulus package. Cash transfer measures are set to benefit farmers, rural workers, and poor pensioners, construction workers, low-income widowers, and more. Additionally, India will provide medical insurance to cover over 5 million rupees per person for frontline workers in the coronavirus outbreak. These include, obviously, nurses, doctors, paramedics, sanitation workers in government hospitals. So, after, talking about or me explaining the stimulus package, do you think that this is enough? That this is enough? Do you think the Modi government needs to be doing more to help out the poor people?
Um, I think this is a very effective measure, and it'll obviously keep the economy afloat and protected without risking the lives of Indian citizens. As far
Uh
as
huh.
I see, this is like the most balanced kind of measure that they can take without spending too much government money, and having to force the Treasury or their version of the Federal Reserve to like print more money essentially. So it
Mm-hmm.
keeps like the economy stable, but it also helps the people that are in need. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think at the moment, given the current situation, this is the best that they can do um, right now.
Do, do you think India should come up with more plans or pump in more money? Because as we've seen with other countries, this money like depletes instantaneously. Like, this money is gone in a matter of like a couple weeks, and I mean, do you think the government should be doing a little bit more, like, get more legislation passed for a better stimulus package, pumping in more money into the economy?
Yeah, so I think I think what the government can do is a bit of twofold. So what they've done now is, along with this stimulus package, was the extension of the lockdown. And what the Modi government or the current government has said that on a case by case basis, or
Uh
case
huh.
by case or like region basis, they would start lifting the lockdown so that
Mm-hmm.
small businesses could go back, people could start getting food more easily, and things like that, and grocery stores and department stores would start opening up in the region, after that region has kind of been cleared of the cases. So
Yeah.
along with that, as that kind of starts picking up, that'll start helping the economy a bit more. Small
Mm-hmm.
businesses are like pretty big in India, and that will start helping the economy. Along with that, another stimulus package would definitely promote more people to kind
Yeah.
of, I guess, obey the lockdown, but also as their lockdown in their area gets lifted, to go out
Yeah.
and get their necessities, um, but still obviously maintain social distancing until the lockdown is lifted nationwide.
Yeah, and just for some of the listeners to understand, businesses are not opening up everywhere in India. It's all a process, and there are three different types of sectors. There are the green, yellow, and red sectors. Green meaning it's very low cases, it's pretty good out there. There should be no problem. Yellow means there are a lot of active cases, and red is like a hotspot, like probably major cities like Bangalore or Mumbai or Delhi. Those places are probably red spots, meaning that it's extreme out there, and no businesses are allowed to open. So only places business can open are yellow and in green sectors. But don't you think that allowing for all these, and when the government says businesses, it means all businesses except for big places that have lots of people, like malls or cinema theaters or things like that. All businesses are open. So wouldn't this signal a back to normal life status in India for those countries in the yellow and green sectors, allowing for even people with the coronavirus who may not know it to go out and start infecting other people?
I think definitely that's like one risk, but given the
Mm-hmm.
fact that India is also increasing the amount of testings per day, along like as the lockdown procedure like progresses, they're also increasing the amount of testing. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it'll kind of collide at the same time. So like as people go out, they're still going to be testing. So it's not like they're when they like lift the lockdown on an area, it's not like they're going to stop um, like looking at that area for cases. Like they're going to keep
Yeah.
monitoring areas. So as the amount of tests also increase, when they increase the lock or when they lift the lockdown, people are still going to keep getting tested. So there's going to be
Mm-hmm.
definitely like um, here and there cases of the virus still in the places where the lockdown has been lifted. But given the effectiveness of testing that is going to happen within the next 3-4 days,
Yeah.
and also the effectiveness of the police force in handling it, uh, and in people obeying like their social distancing norms, I think it should be fine.
And so China is doing something similar in Wuhan, especially. They recently lifted up the lockdown. It's still pretty restricted, but people are free to roam. But they're doing something like the same with sectors, but it's based off of people. So basically, China's one of the places where everybody has a smartphone. It's basically kind of like India as well. And on there they have a government app that's probably required for every citizen to have, and it's basically a QR code that's either highlighted in red, green, or yellow. And basically, it tells people or officials, whether they may be at risk of COVID-19 or if they have COVID-19. So green means that they don't have COVID-19. Yellow means they are probably at risk, meaning that they've probably been in contact with somebody like that through a lot of the mapping that the government does. And red just means that they have it, and they have it, and they should not be outside at all. Do you think something similar to that could be implemented into India? Because India has a growing amount of internet users, and pretty much everybody there has a smartphone right now, and data is incredibly cheap. In India, the plans are incredibly cheap, and it's kind of unbelievable how cheap they are. And many people could get data, they could get a smartphone, and many people already do have it. And implementing something like this could be helpful for government officials, meaning that if people are traveling or even going out of the village or city or town, they'll be able to check, if they have it, or if they've been in contact, or if they're, all clear and good to go. Do you think this extent is possible in India, given its current situation?
Oh yeah, it's definitely possible. And actually, just last week, um, it was reported that India was building a coronavirus tracker, and I believe yesterday or the day before yesterday, they just came out with the app. So the app's name is called Arogya Setu, which translates from
Mm-hmm.
Sanskrit into a bridge of health. Essentially,
Mm-hmm.
it's a beta version of an app that you can still get, and they're still working on it because with any new app, there's like bugs that they can fix. But
Yeah.
so far, it has been like very effective um, in its utilization. Essentially, what
Uh-huh.
the app does um, is that it uses the phone's location data and Bluetooth to assess if you've been near a person who is infected with COVID-19 by looking through a
Mm-hmm.
database of the known cases around you, and then it tells you, oh, you're at a high risk because if you're like in an area where there's a lot of people or a lot of known cases of coronavirus, it'll say you're at a high risk and you should isolate yourself and your immediate family members.
Mm-hmm.
And um, you can also log your temperature, so you can like do your own self testing measure, just to get like a preliminary testing to see if you may have it or not,
Yeah.
um, and things like that. It also has like a chat bot to help determine if you have some of the coronavirus symptoms, and there's updates that are going to keep coming out from the health ministry. And along
Uh-huh.
with this app, they've also come out with two advertisements that I watched. From Essentially, they asked a famous actor in India, to kind of uh, with them shoot two ads to kind of promote staying at home and social distancing, and then also promote the
Uh-huh.
app, so that people will see the ads and they'll be like, "Oh, look, a famous actor is doing that. We should also stay at home, or we should also download the app." And make sure that we're keep checking every day and making sure that we're safe. And if we have to isolate ourselves, that we're doing it effectively.
Yeah, and now this comes with privacy issues. Now, in China, it's a communist nation, so there's nothing like privacy there. There's People don't even know what that is. But in the biggest democracy in the world, privacy is something that is probably valued in the country as it is probably valued in any other democracy, and it's a big issue when talking about using somebody's phone or going into their phone, tracking who they call, or having the potential to take data apart from just call logs, being able to take other data like photos or other location data. So there's a lot of privacy concerns, and something like this would probably not never happen in the US because of how seriously people take privacy to be. So what do you like? What privacy concerns do you think may arise in India with this app?
Yeah, so I think definitely because it uses location data and Bluetooth to figure out if you are like if you're at risk of coronavirus. But I think
Mm-hmm.
people, like, I've read articles written by Western media companies where they're blowing it out of proportion, calling it a privacy disaster. But like,
Yeah.
it uses the same technology and gets the same data that your Google Maps does. Google Maps
Mm-hmm.
does Bluetooth. It does your location data, and that's all it does. Essentially, it pairs your location on a map with the database of people in that area who have coronavirus, and then depending on the density of the cases of coronavirus in that area, it'll simply tell you if you are at high risk or at not so high of a risk. So, as far as privacy concerns, if you're concerned about the government um, having access to your location, um, I I see that as a problem, or I see that as the only problem. But also
Mm-hmm.
in India, the app just crossed 75 million downloads, and it's only been out for a
Mm-hmm.
day. So I don't
Yeah.
think, um, as far as far as I understand, I don't think the people in India see it to be as big as a problem right now. And
Mm-hmm.
also, it's optional. Like in India, it's optional. You don't have to download it. Like you're talking about
Yeah.
in China, where it's like mandated. I'm pretty sure you have to download the app.
Yeah. It's mandated in China that everybody has to have that.
Yeah, in India, it's
Yeah.
completely optional. You don't have to download the app if you don't want to. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, people want to. It just crossed 75 million downloads. So The only problem I see is the location services thing, but I think people are also blowing it out of proportion.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, at this point of time, during this pandemic, I don't think privacy should be your main concern. Your main concern should be, am I infected? Do I have the potential, like, am I going to potentially die because of this virus? And what the government is doing to help us out. And I think, sometimes this whole privacy issue can take a huge dip, and it's taken out of proportion as you described. So I definitely think that people should not be worried about that, but just be glad that, your government's doing something to help track the virus and help keep you safe
Yeah, yeah,
at this
definitely.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And, sticking with China, many Indians in India and abroad have been publicly criticizing China for COVID-19 and have used names such as the Wuhan virus or the China virus. Do you think this negative sentiment from Indians to Chinese people could result in hardship for India, as the country needs China for its supply of essentials, such as face masks and other protective gear?
Yeah. So I think the negative sentiment towards China from Indian citizens definitely, certainly complicates things. India is a multicultural nation, and if these negative sentiments continue, it could cause severe problems within the country, such as targeted harassment or discrimination towards Indian citizens of like Nepalese descent or those from the northeast region of India that are closer
Yeah.
geographically to China.
Mm-hmm.
So like morally, I don't think it's correct by any means for Indian citizens to call it the Wuhan virus or China virus or like publicly criticize China. That being said,
Mm-hmm.
from a geopolitical perspective, the governments of India and China are still working together to make sure that they have a healthy relationship that benefits
Yeah.
both countries during this tense period. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but also, I definitely think China should be held accountable because they were not effectively communicating the seriousness of the situation within their country when it was happening, and it caused a lot
Mm-hmm.
of
Exactly.
problems when the virus like spread so quickly and around the world. So I think China should still be held accountable, but that should be like a separate situation that should be dealt with later and not while we're still
Yeah.
in the thick of it.
But the problem is that, I mean, there are many problems with politicians in India, and one of which is where they just say a lot of random things, and sometimes they are very, negative towards a group of people. And we've seen that some politicians in India are, coining these phrases, like actually using them in their speeches, or when they're talking with citizens, calling it the Wuhan virus or the China virus, or blaming them publicly, in front of the press. And this could, I mean, I think would have probably a huge impact on China's response to India, or China's helping of India. So what do you think the Indian government should do to these not do to them, but like, how do you think they should control the narrative so that China isn't given a wrong impression?
Yeah, so I understand that. Yeah, so like I think a lot of the politicians who are doing this are like mostly state government officials. And the central government, I feel like, uh, for the most part, knows like those officials like know what they're doing. So the central government should obviously continue to maintain good relationships with China. And I think
Uh-huh.
China, for the most part, understands that India is on like the same page as they are. And I actually don't think it would be beneficial for China to like cut off contact with India.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think, given like the tension of that region, if
Mm-hmm.
China were to cut off aid to India,
Mm-hmm.
India could always ask for help from other countries. But also, if
Yeah.
China were to do that, I feel like um, it would actually tarnish their name more. It would cause. I think point is that China is too concerned about their image to actually um, like
Actually take
publicly.
any action
Yeah,
towards this,
yeah, you're
because
right.
they don't want to be criticized even more after the virus. So
Exactly. They don't want to
yeah.
seem like they're like protecting their own interests too much, so much so that they're like harming other people
Yeah.
as much as like, even though they're authoritarian, they really only care about China. They have to have a good public image.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah. So like,
And
mhm.
mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah. So like, like I said, it's definitely wrong that they're doing it, and it definitely shouldn't be happening. But given the situation, I don't think it will lead to. Um, it will definitely have some impact, but it won't be as serious.
as people
As
may think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of the political climate, BJP is in power with a absolute full majority in parliament, and Congress, the opposition party, is very low. They're over like 40 seats or something just by themselves as a party.
Mm,
So it's very very low in India right now for the Congress party. So, and Rahul Gandhi, not the leader of the party anymore, but the presumed leader by everybody in India of
mhm.
the Congress party, has been criticizing Modi's usage of things, like what he's been doing, and how he's dealing with the coronavirus. Something funny was that as soon as so Modi did this thing where um he wanted to respect all of the frontline workers, people like doctors, policemen, nurses, people who are putting their lives on the line to save other people.
Yeah,
And you come out, you take, like, I don't know, like a pan and like a spoon or something, and you bang it to show your support
yeah. Mm.
towards the frontline workers. And a tweet from Rahul Gandhi said that you know slamming some utensils on a pan is not going to get rid of the coronavirus, but more testing, more masks, more ventilators. I mean things like that are going to help the coronavirus. And I just feel like at this point, instead of criticizing the government at hand, he should probably be helping out by not criticizing and creating a intense political climate, but by joining forces and helping each other. Do you think that there's even a possibility for Rahul Gandhi and Modi to come together and work on it together? Like, is there even a possibility?
I think so. Like, kind of addressing that, the thing that they did. I think it was March
Yeah.
25th. It was like at like 5 p.m. for 5 minutes. It was one of those things,
Mm-hmm.
where people would go outside, obviously still maintaining social distancing norms, um,
Yeah.
and they would.
But I mean, one thing I might add is that social distancing norms, that may be true in some places, but in a lot of places there have been reports that people have come out of their houses and crowded streets together to actually start doing it, which actually probably would have spread the virus more than containing it, to be honest.
Oh yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that. But as far as the announcement goes, when Prime Minister Modi like announced it, on his like daily or like weekly updates that he has, he specifically told
Yeah.
people to like maintain social distancing and like just go out, like not go outside, but go out like on their balcony or like open up their window or something. And essentially all they had to do was clap for 5 minutes or like bang on um, like
Uh-huh.
a pan for like 5 minutes, and all this was meant to do
Yeah.
is to show like frontline workers that like, look, all of India is in support for you, and we're here for you, and we appreciate what you're doing. As
Mm-hmm.
far as if Rahul Gandhi would be able to work with the existing government, especially since Congress only has 40 seats in parliament,
Yeah.
um, I think it's a tough question to answer because I think it has a lot of nuance to it because the his family has been in power and they've been leader of Congress party for as long as India has been an official country since like the
Literally since independence.
yeah
Or
since
yeah. Yeah.
1947. His like I think it was his granddad or great granddad was
His
the
great
first.
grandfather.
Yeah, his great
Yeah.
grandfather was the first prime minister of India, and they've been pretty much in charge throughout until the BJP won a few
Mm-hmm.
years ago, and then won again like last year with that huge landslide victory. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I, as much as I would like to be optimistic and say that he can work with the existing government, I don't think it's possible for him to look past the fact that he lost all the power that he had a
Yeah.
few years ago. And I don't think it's possible for him to set aside differences and work with the existing government to try to come together and come towards a more effective solution with dealing with the virus.
And that's just kind of sad. I mean, your country is in a pandemic and you choose politics over the safety of your country, and I put a potential partnership and helping each other in a dire time. It's just kind of sad. It just kind of sucks. I mean, to see how politics kind of takes over, you know, what's actually more important, which is protecting your country and providing service. That's what you signed up for. And here they are playing their political games and not necessarily helping out the current government, setting aside their differences, coming together jointly to, support the public and to do whatever is necessary to keep people safe. So, I just find that very sad. And, I hope, like you said, I hope they can change. I hope there's something that could happen, try to be optimistic, but probably won't happen.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's
so that's all I can
unfortunate,
say.
but yeah. Hmm.
Hmm. It is, yeah, it's very unfortunate. And, so moving on to, with the coronavirus and how it spread. Now, I'm not sure if everybody knows about this, but I think most people do. The Tablighi Jamaat is a religious congregation. It's an Islamic religious congregation. It was held in New Delhi, even though the city had banned all public gatherings. So this was a religious event that was violating a certain law. It was violating the lockdown. And New Delhi is the capital of India, so it's kind of crazy how they violated this lockdown with no regard to the law. And their carelessness has led to the coronavirus being a super spreader, which has infected thousands of people. I think over 100 people from the congregation have been affected with the coronavirus as it spread from one person to the other. And all these people that went to the congregation went back to their separate states in their country, but there were also people from 40 different countries that came to that religious that religious meeting. So not only did that meeting specifically potentially affected 40 countries, but it also was the result of a mass spreading throughout the whole entire country. And and like I said, these missionaries are from all over India and from 4 different countries. So like, what do you think about this incident? What do you think about it? And, what are your opinions?
Yeah, so scientifically speaking, obviously the congregation should have followed the rules set in place by the state and central governments. And if they had done that, they would have been able to protect members of their own community and also the whole nation.
Yeah.
I understand that it's a religious congregation and they have right to practice their religion, but there has to be an understanding between the state government and the religious congregation that by doing this, they're risking the lives of members of their own congregation, but also like almost like if we're going to go to the nth degree of 1.3 billion people in India plus who knows how many more millions of people in the 40 different countries that those congregation members were from.
And because of this incident, Islamophobia has taken an incredible rise, even more than before. The BJP is a Hindu nationalist party, and with that party, there's been a lot of negative sentiment towards the Muslim population, which is the second biggest in the world, which is insane. It's the second biggest in the world. And it's been up ever since the Citizenship Amendment Act, and it's been up since Kashmir. Like, there's been a lot of things that have been going on. Do you think it's right for Indian Hindus to look at all Muslims the same when maybe a few have done something harmful?
So obviously it's kind of common sense, I guess. So discrimination obviously against any group of people is not in the interest of any country, especially during this pandemic, but India, especially India. So I think Indians, regardless of their religion, should really be working together to tackle the virus. The thing with the Tablighi Jamaat is they're like a different kind of a sect of Islam, and they believe in like their idea of Islam is much more focused on the Arab Islam, like Muslims. So they believe that like Muslims in India should not become Indianized, like they shouldn't adopt the identity of India and become Indians. They should like remain as Arab Muslims. Yeah. So I think to answer the question if Indian Hindus should look at all Muslims as the same, I think Indian Hindus and Indian Muslims for the most part are like they go hand in hand. They've been friends and brothers since like the beginning. I think it's just events like the small events that have happened throughout the years, along with media and their need to like spin stories that have caused more division than unity in the country. But again,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
you say spin stories, but shouldn't the government in hand right now be supporting the Muslims who are being affected by Islamophobia, by racism right now? It's a secular country, and you see that Modi should have been addressing this. And some people, into to his defense, say that he has, with a tweet saying that we are all one, we shouldn't be criticizing each other. But but shouldn't he be specifically calling out the Muslims, saying that we need to not be racist towards them. We're all brothers and sisters. Like he said it in a more indirect way, and we've seen that multiple times. He's never actually called out an incident regarding Muslims in protection of them. He's always indirectly supported them, and I say supported with quotes. So shouldn't the Modi government or other BJP leaders around the country step up and protect the Muslims who are being affected by this racism?
yeah. So I think it's kind of like risky politics in India because I wouldn't say all BJP supporters, but there's definitely sect of the BJP supporters who are much more nationalist and much more Hindu nationalist than the other ones,
Yeah.
and who have much more of an anti-Muslim view. But I feel like for the most part, BJP is like, while they are technically a Hindu nationalist like party, they are have
Mm-hmm.
always been like fair across all across India whenever they're handling any situation. For example, they've been passing legislation to help Muslim women get education more easily. They passed a thing I think it was last year that banned triple talaq, which is like a form of like religious divorce, essentially, where if you say talaq 3 times in a row, you can instantly divorce
Yeah, yeah,
your
yeah. Mm-hmm.
spouse. So they banned that in to help like women in some of these more abusive relationships have a right to law and attorney and go to a court and actually get a proper divorce if they have to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, we can address this maybe in a different episode, but Kashmir, that whole thing, I think it's been misconstrued a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to like sound like I'm defending the BJP. I'm not like a spokesman for the BJP by any standard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but I think, like you said, the BJP and Modi should have definitely gone and addressed it right away. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, considering the kind of toxic politics in India, it would have been risky to. I think it would have been in the best interest for anyone to kind of make a blanketed approach to kind of test the waters before making a direct call out saying that like the Muslims are like our friends. Like I think he definitely did that, like you said, with the tweet where he said that
Yeah.
like that we should all be working together and they're all with us.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that there are these small events that happen and small groups of people that uh, who are more extreme that kind of take things out of proportion, and then media kind of spins it, and then it kind of gets out of hand, and it's made to look worse than it actually is.
Because some other issues when it comes to the coronavirus and Muslims is that um, we saw a lot of cases in New Delhi, especially people from the congregation, that when nurses and doctors came to help them and provide them assistance, um, these Muslim people from the congregation decided to spit at them, or potentially spreading the virus to them and creating a harmful environment for the doctors and other patients around them. Some people even you know took their pants off, or like have done disgusting things like that in protest or against these doctors and nurses who are literally trying to help them out and trying to provide them some sort of assistance and getting rid of the coronavirus or keeping them in a safe place. What do you think of that situation? And what do you think that we can do to stop those things from happening? Because we saw that as soon as that happened, we saw many things that have been spreading through WhatsApp and Facebook, and even through some BJP politicians that don't, like, for instance, don't buy groceries from Muslim vendors, or don't go to a Muslim store, or don't talk with them, or don't interact with them because they might spit at you, they might do this, or they spit on their vegetables and wiped it all like that to spread the virus to you. Do you think that's true? And if not, what do you think the government should be doing to stop that as well?
Mm-hmm. So I think there are, like, I've heard or I've read cases of this happening, but I think the government needs to. I don't think the government should be take kind of like holding on to these individual cases and talking about it more, because
Mm-hmm.
I think, like I said earlier, the Indian Hindus and Muslims should be working together, or even, I shouldn't say Hindus and Muslims only, Christians and people of all faiths in India should be working together, and they
Yeah,
really need to set
definitely.
aside their differences right now. And
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how the situation with the Tablighi Jamaat is developing, I still think that
Mm-hmm.
people shouldn't be like spreading false information like some of those politicians are and some of the news
Yeah.
sites are, and they should just be focusing on how can we work together to handle the virus.
Exactly, I
Yeah.
agree. And moving on from the situation, something of contrast. There was a chariot pulling ritual in Kalaburgi district of the state of Karnataka, where this chariot pulling actually violated the lockdown set in place nationwide. There were, at least from the picture that I could tell, at least 100 or even more in that gathering. This was probably a hotspot for the virus to spread pretty easily, since there were a lot of people there at the same time. Since this Hindu ritual, since this was a Hindu ritual, it seems that there wasn't much backlash from the media or from politicians like there was with the Tablighi Jamaat gathering in Delhi. Now, both are at fault here. So why is one treated with racism and why is the other not?
Yeah, so personally, I believe, like the Tablighi Jamaat, the chariot pulling group should have maintained social distancing norms. They should have stayed home during the lockdown. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it should be noted, or should be like, there should be like, we should kind of understand that it's hard to assess the situation on the ground based solely on media reports, especially since they tend
Yeah.
to have their own spin on stories. And I think, as a general rule, an incident that occurs shouldn't be construed as representative of a whole ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like, again, as far as I know, we don't know how cooperative the members of Tablighi Jamaat have been with um, the authorities, and how cooperative members of the chariot pulling group have been with authorities, and we don't know, or we can't assume how the situation on the ground is going, um, based on like just reports. It's kind of hard to tell.
Because with the chariot pulling thing, the management of this event and politicians there actually did stop the event. They actually weren't even planning on having it, but it was the people in the village that were careless and decided to do it, even though the management there and the politicians told them not to.
Okay, yeah,
And yeah.
yeah. So that's like a completely different horse, because like,
Hmm.
if you have like people disobeying the government, that's a different story. But with the Tablighi Jamaat, they're like they're their own organization, and they
Yeah.
have people coming from outside of India, and I would say they're kind of, in a way, an extra governmental or an extrajudicial organization. Like, they have their own rules, kind of. They should definitely
Yeah.
still be following the rules of the country that they're in,
Uh-huh.
but it's like a much more organized thing, the Tablighi Jamaat versus this chariot pulling group. By the sounds of it, it was just a lot of like members of the community who, despite the organizers of the chariot pulling ritual, despite the
Hmm.
organizers saying that no, we're not going to have it due to safety concerns, and despite the government saying no, you shouldn't have it due to safety concerns, people being adamant and doing it anyway. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I haven't read more any. much about this incident, but I'm not sure how they interacted with police, because a lot of the stories that I've read are how these members of each group have interacted with the police, and that has kind of influenced the perspective that people
Influence,
have.
yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and
I mean, I guess it depends on the narrative being shown by the media too. Like,
yeah, yeah,
you know, what they're really showing or what's actually going on there. So there's
yeah,
a lot, you know, there's a lot of moving parts.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good. We got that addressed. Now moving on to the United States and India. So recently, President Trump, via a tweet, said that he is suspending all immigration. As you know, this has a dire impact on Indian immigrants who are currently living in the U.S. For the Indians who have not applied for a green card but are still on a visa, they have a chance of being deported and leaving behind their whole life, or even other family members who may have a green card or a citizenship, and go back to the country where they may not have anything at all. I mean, they're going back to a country where they have no home, no source of income, nothing like that. So, what can Prime Minister Modi do to help Indian immigrants who may have been separated by this immigration ban?
Okay, so the actual immigration ban, I read through some of the protocols and some of the actual executive order that was signed. So
Uh huh.
despite like the kind of uh the how like instantaneous like the President Trump's tweet was, and how like harsh he wanted the immigration policy, like the suspension to be, the actual um like the actual executive order that was signed was like a lot different, and there was a lot of exemptions that were in place. So
Uh
for
huh.
example, like if you're a visa holder and you've applied for a green card but you're already within the US, you're not at a risk of being deported, because
Mm-hmm.
the USCIS, which is the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, they've temporarily
Mm-hmm.
suspended in-person visits at least until May 3rd, but they're still going to
Yeah.
continue to accept and process applications and petitions online. So
Okay.
if you're applying for a green card and your visa expires, you can apply to have your visa like renewed, so you'll still
Mm-hmm.
be able to stay in the U.S. And there's still all the same rules in effect. Like there's like a grace period that you have to like
Yeah.
apply, and as long as you've applied, they still let you stay, that kind of thing. um
Mm-hmm.
and then as far as for visa holders who apply for green card but may have gone to India while the green card application is being processed, as long as they
Yeah.
have their valid visa document, or an official travel document other than a visa, such as a transportation letter, an appropriate boarding foil, or an advance parole document. So these three
Yeah.
documents that's been listed specifically in the whitehouse.gov presidential actions, and then the
Mm-hmm.
proclamation, this specific file. It's been
Mm-hmm.
listed on there. As long as they have either the visa or those 3-4 types of official documents, one or the other, they shouldn't have a
Yeah.
problem re-entering the U.S. So I
Okay.
guess the
So.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so the only people who would have a problem is, um, say your visa like expires, but you're in India, you'll be stuck in India until your visa application
Gets renewed.
gets renewed.
Okay. Okay. So it's not as harsh as we thought it would be, or how harsh it seemed in the tweet, at least.
Yeah, like because
And
he, I
you know,
think he
it's
was,
it. Yeah.
yeah, I think he was mentioning
Mhm.
something about like green card holders, but like as long as if you have a green card, you're good, because it specifically says if you're a legal permanent resident, you're fine, and
Yeah.
then it says as long as you have your U.S. visa, like your visa, or you have um, the valid travel documents, you're also fine. And there's a bunch of other like exceptions in that. There's like, oh, if you have an EB-5 immigrant investor program, then you're fine. If you have a spouse who's
Mm-hmm.
a United States citizen, you're fine. If you're under 21 um, and you're a child of a U.S. citizen, you're fine. If you're a member of the armed forces, or you have spouse or you're a child of a member of the armed forces, you're fine. And
Mm-hmm.
these are all like, it's really easy to look up. These are all like
Yeah. Yeah.
put in, and there's a bunch of exceptions that they have. So like, despite how harsh he made it seem in his tweet, um, I guess, I mean, at this point, it should be assumed that you can't really like trust what he's going to tweet. You should like look at um, the actual thing that he signed. But yeah, despite
For sure.
what he said in his tweet, the actual policy is much less harsh than it was, or than it seems based on his tweet. But
Yeah, and
yeah.
this is super important for Indians because over 800,000 people are 800,000 Indians actually are applying for a green card, and most of the people who apply for a green card, the big majority of them are all Indians. So this becomes a great place of concern for many people who have lived here for decades but still can't get a green card or can't process a green card. They're always scared of being deported or getting get rid of the country. So it's good that we were able to address this and understand that it's not as harsh as it seems. And we know that President Trump and Prime Minister Modi have a great relationship, especially from what we can see from their meetings when they both visited each other's countries. So we're hoping that there is some background dialogue between the two nations on how they can protect Indian citizens in the United States. So
Yeah.
that
So
was great to know.
that while we're at it, we can address that as well. There's been
Mm-hmm.
talks between U.S. officials and Indian officials,
Yeah.
with U.S. officials saying that we're willing to let Indian citizens who are stuck in the U.S. due to the lockdown fly back to
Mm-hmm.
India, and India's like, okay, we'll provide the flights and we'll fly our flights over to U.S. You guys can do the testing and everything. Make sure none of the crew have the coronavirus, and like make sure none of that becomes a problem, but then have
Mm-hmm.
Indian citizens who may be stuck in the US, making sure that they can safely go back to India without any problems. So that's
Yeah,
one
and
thing that they've been addressing. Yeah.
yeah, and we're glad that both of the countries' leaders have a great relationship, and at least from what we can tell, they consider each other friends, and they're working, like you said, closely together behind the doors, figuring out ways to transport people and help people who are in need. So it's good that we're able to address this issue and really understand at the core what's actually happening. Because media takes things out of proportion sometimes, and sometimes things can be said in different ways. So it's
Yeah.
good we were able to address that. And our final question of the podcast today, it's been a long episode, usually longer than some other ones. This last one's going to be, how do you think India can work with other nations in order to help stop the spread of COVID-19? Because we see lots of European nations, Western countries and Eastern countries working together to find some sort of solution and help each other out. How can India come into this mix, and what can they bring to the world stage?
Okay. So as far as um, working the with other countries on the world stage, India, especially if India wants to continue making a presence on the world stage and begin working towards becoming another superpower in the world. This right now is a crucial period for India, because based
Yeah.
on how well they do now is how they um, is what they can use to show people in the future, once uh, this virus situation dies down, that they have the ability and capability to handle uh, times of stress and periods of stress effectively. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, what they can do and work with other nations in stopping the spread is maintaining their own lockdown procedure, making sure that travel within their own nation and from their nation to other nations is restricted or uh, uh, monitored closely. Another thing they can do is provide medications as required, and making sure that they are doing some testing. That's one thing that they can work on for sure. With the
Uh-huh.
hydroxychloroquine thing, see if
Yeah.
they can do some testing on their own to see if it's actually effective. But of course, continue to provide some of those medications. Another thing they can do, especially with the definitely like the high budget of the private sector in India. Um,
Yeah.
the private sector, as long and the central government can work closely together to kind of have a joint plan to work with other nations in investing and collaborating for vaccine development, making sure they're sharing knowledge, sharing
Mm-hmm.
resources, and making
Yeah.
sure that I guess essentially the more brains that they have on the project, the easier they'll be able to figure out an effective vaccine.
Yeah, and that relationship between the public and private sector, along with their relationship, with other nations and their private and public sectors, is definitely something that's super important. And I feel like from what you've said, it's been going pretty well in India. The communication between the public and private sector, with companies doing research, R&D, and figuring out different treatments for the COVID-19 problem. So yeah, that's great, and that's really good to know.
Yeah, and then definitely in the future, India can continue to prosper and continue to help other countries prosper with these relationships built, with these close knit relationships and friendships built with other countries, and kind of building a network of trust that they can help. They can use to help them become a superpower sometime in the future.
Definitely. Well, before we close off, I just want to thank you, Samskrit, for coming onto the show and, having a really productive and awesome conversation with me on how India is handling, or how well they can handle, the coronavirus. It was really nice to hear your perspective, and I'm sure many people who are listening here today learned something new about the coronavirus pandemic. So thank you for coming on.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me on. It was a lot of fun, and it's nice to talk about my perspective and inform people on what India is doing to address this pandemic, especially because of how global and widespread the pandemic is.
Yeah. And, finally, I just want to thank you, to all the listeners who are taking time out of your day to listen and help bridge the political divide, because that's what the goal of this podcast is. Our next podcast will be next Monday, where we discuss abortion with another special guest. This will be released next Monday, the 2nd of May. So be sure to tune in for another awesome guest and a great discussion. Until then, thank you, and I'll see you all next week.